It's a bright, busy afternoon at a crowded downtown bus stop. A black woman stands with quiet dignity, waiting for her bus. Out of nowhere, a racist cop approaches her, calling her ugly trash, hurling racial slurs with a sneer. But what happens next shocks everyone as the woman's unseen strength takes over, and the officer realizes too late just who he's dealing with. Hold on a second. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to see more jaw-dropping stories like this. The downtown streets of the city were bustling with life as pedestrians hurried from one place to another, the noise of passing cars filling the air. Danielle Jackson, a black woman in her late 20s, was walking down the sidewalk, minding her business, when she caught the eye of Officer Blake, a man whose face she knew all too well. Blake had a reputation, one that preceded him in the city. He was known for his overbearing, often racist attitude toward people of color, particularly black residents. His unchecked bias had made him a nuisance to many, but Danielle never imagined she would be on the receiving end of his cruelty. As she walked, Blake stepped forward, blocking her path. His stance was aggressive, his hands clenched at his sides. Well, what do we have here?" Blake's voice oozed with disdain, loud enough for the few pedestrians nearby to hear. Danielle stopped in her tracks, her heartbeat quickening. She had heard the stories about him, how he treated people differently based on their skin color, but she never thought she would experience it firsthand. She stood tall, keeping her composure, as she looked up at the officer. "I'm just walking," Danielle said, keeping her voice steady, but there was an edge of caution in her tone. Blake smirked. "You're just walking, huh?" He took a step closer to her, his voice becoming sharper. "Why don't you take your trash somewhere else?" Danielle's face flushed, her heart pounding in her chest. The words were venomous, but she refused to show any sign of vulnerability. "Excuse me," she asked, her brows furrowing in confusion, though she already knew what was coming. Blake took another step closer, his stance becoming more imposing. "You heard me, trash. You don't belong here. Ugly, trashy, good-for-nothing people like you shouldn't even be on this block," he sneered, his words cutting through the air like a blade. The audacity of the insult sent a wave of anger rushing through Danielle. It wasn't just the words, it was the assumption, the arrogance of someone who believed they could degrade her with impunity. She had faced racism in many forms before, but this was different. This wasn't just an insult, it was an attempt to make her feel small, less than human. "I don't have time for this," Danielle said, her voice low and controlled, even as the rage boiled inside her. She tried to walk around him, but Blake stepped into her path again, his body blocking her way completely. "Oh, you're not going anywhere, trash," Blake spat, his face twisted in anger. "I'm not done with you yet. You think you can walk away from me after insulting me?" Danielle took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for her phone. She had no intention of letting this man's words slide. "You're done here. I'm calling the station," she said, her fingers already dialing. Blake laughed, stepping forward with such force that he knocked her arm aside, sending her phone flying. "Calling the station? For what? For disrespecting me?" The crowd that had been walking by had begun to notice the altercation, but no one dared to intervene. Blake's presence was intimidating, and it seemed like everyone was content to pretend they hadn't seen anything. Danielle's chest tightened, realizing that she was on her own in this situation. "Get away from me," she demanded, taking another step back. But before she could react, Blake reached out, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her forward, causing her to stumble. "What's the matter, huh? You scared?" Blake's voice was cold, taunting. "I'll show you what happens when you don't know your place. Let go of me," Danielle shouted, her pulse racing. This wasn't just an argument anymore, it was something much worse. The bystanders stood in silence, some pulling out their phones to record, but no one stepped in. Danielle's mind was spinning. What can I do? She was outnumbered and outmatched, with no one to help her. But her instincts told her one thing: she wasn't going to let him get away with this. With every ounce of strength she could muster, she pulled away from Blake's grip, pushing him with all her might. "I said let go," she screamed, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. Blake, taken aback by her defiance, stumbled back a few steps, his eyes widening. He had underestimated her. But before he could react, Danielle squared her shoulders, ready for what was coming next. She had always been taught to stand her ground, no matter the cost. This time, she wasn't backing down. The officer's face turned red with fury. He reached for his baton, his eyes blazing with rage. "You think you can push me," he snarled. "You'll regret this." But before he could strike, a voice rang out from behind them. "Hey, that's enough." Danielle turned to see a man, a stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, stepping forward. He had seen enough, And unlike the others, he wasn't afraid of the officer. He was a military agent, and he wasn't about to let this injustice go unanswered. "You heard the lady," the man said, his tone commanding. "Let her go." The man's voice echoed in the air, a clear command that pierced through the tension surrounding them. Blake, still enraged and caught off guard by the stranger's sudden appearance, turned sharply. His hand tightened around the baton, the weapon still raised, ready to strike. But the stranger was calm, his posture unwavering. "Let go of her, officer." "You're out of line," the stranger said again, his voice like steel. The cop hesitated, his eyes scanning the man before him. There was something about him, something that didn't quite add up. He wasn't just some bystander. There was a quiet intensity in the way he stood, a confidence that unnerved Blake. The crowd around them, still holding their phones, seemed to breathe in unison, all eyes on the unfolding scene. They could sense the shift in power, the balance was tipping, and they weren't sure which way it would fall. Danielle, though still shaken, felt a rush of hope. For the first time, she wasn't alone. This stranger, whoever he was, had stepped in when no one else would. He wasn't backing down. "What's your problem, huh?" Blake sneered, taking a step forward, his baton now inches from the stranger's face. "Mind your own business, this doesn't concern you." But the man didn't flinch. He stood his ground, eyes locked on Blake, unwavering. "It concerns me when you put your hands on an innocent woman, officer. Now drop the weapon." Blake's jaw clenched, his fingers twitching around the baton. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. He had been in control, the one who dictated the situation. But now, this stranger, this forceful, imposing figure, was taking that control away from him. For a moment, Blake glanced back at the other pedestrians, the ones who had been recording. They weren't just passive observers anymore. Their phones were pointed at him, capturing every second. If he didn't act soon, this whole altercation would go viral, and his career could be over. The thought of losing his job, his authority, made his temper flare. "You want to do something about it?" Blake challenged, taking a menacing step forward. "Yes," the stranger replied coldly, stepping into Blake's personal space, his body language calm but ready for anything. The officer hesitated, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. He was sizing up the stranger, trying to gauge whether he was a threat. That hesitation gave the man just enough time to make his move. In a swift, practiced motion, the stranger grabbed Blake's baton, twisting it out of the officer's hand with ease. The sound of the weapon hitting the ground was sharp, a momentary victory that silenced the crowd. Blake stood frozen for a heartbeat, his grip loosened, now weaponless. "You're not in charge here anymore," the man said, his voice low and dangerous. Blake stepped back, his hands raised in a mix of surrender and disbelief. He had never faced anything like this before. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking with both rage and fear. The stranger's lips twitched, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You don't need to know, but you'll regret this." Blake's mind raced, but before he could act, the stranger stepped away and moved toward Danielle. Placing a hand gently on her shoulder, he turned to her, his face softening. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice quiet, soothing. Danielle's heart raced, her breath coming out in uneven bursts. She had been holding it together through the entire ordeal, but now that the immediate danger had passed, the adrenaline started to wear off. "Yes, I'm fine," she whispered, her voice trembling. As the stranger turned to face Blake one more time, his demeanor shifted. The calm, collected man was gone, replaced by someone else entirely. The air around him grew heavy, and the tension skyrocketed. "Don't make this worse than it already is," the stranger warned, his eyes locking onto Blake's with a fierce intensity. He took a step forward, a subtle movement that made Blake flinch. "Leave now. You don't want to make me finish what I started." Blake, still stunned by the events unfolding before him, finally took a step back, his eyes darting between the stranger and the crowd. He had been outclassed, outmaneuvered. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to have the power, but now, in front of all these people, his authority had crumbled. The younger officer who had been watching from the sidelines now stepped forward, his face pale. "Blake, let's just go. We don't need this right now." Blake's anger flared again, but he knew the younger officer was right. He couldn't win this fight. Not now, not in front of so many witnesses. With one last glare at the stranger, he turned and stalked away, his partner following closely behind. The tension in the air remained thick even after the officers left. The crowd slowly began to disperse, some still whispering about what had just occurred. But for Danielle and the stranger, the moment wasn't over yet. There was something unspoken between them, a bond forged in the heat of the confrontation. As the crowd cleared, the stranger finally spoke again. "You're safe now," he said, his tone softer now. "No one's going to hurt you." Danielle nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice full of confusion and gratitude. The man hesitated, his gaze drifting to the street behind them, as though he was still processing the situation. "It doesn't matter right now, but I'm here to help." As the crowd dispersed and the street slowly returned to its normal pace, Danielle stood there, still reeling from the events that had just unfolded. The pain from the officer's actions was beginning to set in, but the adrenaline had kept her moving. Now that it was over, the rush of fear was slowly being replaced with confusion. The stranger who had saved her from further humiliation had stepped into her life without any warning, and yet it felt like he was more than just a random bystander. There was something about him, something she couldn't quite place, but it wasn't normal. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice still shaking. Her head was spinning, trying to comprehend the wild events. He had come out of nowhere, intervened with no hesitation, and with so much calm authority. She had thought she was alone, with no one willing to stand up for her. But here he was, as if he had known exactly what to do. The stranger turned to face her fully, his stance relaxed now but his eyes sharp, taking in the environment around them. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind before finally responding. "I couldn't just stand by and watch," he said, his tone steady but there was an edge to it. "You don't deserve to be treated like that." Danielle didn't know what to say. She didn't know why he had helped her or who he really was. She wasn't sure if she even had the energy to ask more questions. But there was one thing she was sure of: this man was no ordinary person. His calmness, his presence, and the way he had handled the cop, it was like something out of a movie. She felt like she should know more about him, but something told her she had to be cautious. "Who are you?" she asked again, this time more insistently. He paused for a moment, his gaze lingering on her, but it was clear he was deciding whether or not to share anything more with her. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck before answering. "My name's Marcus," he said simply. "I'm just a guy who's been through a lot. I saw what happened, and I couldn't let it go." Danielle couldn't help but stare at him, her mind racing. "Just a guy?" she repeated, incredulous. This man had just stepped in and confronted an officer, something most people wouldn't even dream of doing. She knew it had to be more than that. But before she could probe any deeper, she noticed something strange in his eyes. There was a weight there, something that hinted at secrets, at battles fought far away from this street. It was like he was holding something back, a truth he wasn't ready to share. "Look, it's not important right now," Marcus said, cutting off her questioning thoughts. "What matters is that you're okay, and that cop won't be bothering you again." He was trying to brush it off, but Danielle wasn't having it. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're not just a guy. I need to know what's going on. You can't just show up out of nowhere and do that to an officer like that unless—" She trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. Marcus's reaction was instantaneous. His eyes darkened for a split second, and he stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. "I'm not who you think I am," he said softly, "but I'm here because I know exactly what you're going through." Danielle felt a chill run down her spine. Something in his tone sent a ripple of fear and curiosity through her all at once. She could tell he wasn't just being cryptic for no reason. There was something personal behind those words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus glanced around quickly, his eyes scanning the street. He looked nervous for the first time since they had met. His usual calm demeanor had cracked just enough for her to see the edge of something darker beneath it. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to say something he wasn't sure he should. "I used to be in the military," he said finally, his eyes locking onto hers with a solemn expression. "But it's not just any military. It was a special forces unit. I've been trained for situations like this." Danielle stared at him, her mind racing. Special forces, that explained so much, but it also raised even more questions. "So you're some kind of soldier?" she asked, the shock in her voice unmistakable. Marcus nodded. "More than just a soldier." His eyes darkened again. "I've seen things, done things, that you couldn't even imagine. It's the kind of life where you learn how to survive no matter what. And that cop back there, he had no idea who he was messing with. Not even close." The weight of his words settled on Danielle like a heavy blanket. "So you're saying you could have taken him down, right then and there?" she asked, still processing everything he had just shared. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gave her a long look, almost as if he were weighing her thoughts, trying to gauge her reaction. Then he nodded slowly. "If I had to, yes, but I didn't want to make it worse for you. You didn't need to be dragged into that mess." Danielle felt a strange mix of relief and admiration for the stranger who had saved her. He wasn't just some bystander, he was someone who had the skills and the experience to take down a man like that, and yet he had chosen not to. But now, she was more curious than ever. And now, what happens next? Marcus let out a small sigh, clearly torn. We can't let this slide. The officer, Harrison, he's just the tip of the iceberg. There's more corruption behind him, and if we want to stop it, we'll have to go deeper than just one incident. Danielle's pulse quickened as she began to understand the depth of the situation. What are you saying? Marcus glanced at the broken sidewalk, the weight of the conversation heavy in the air. I'm saying this isn't over, not by a long shot. You've already become a part of this fight, whether you like it or not. The words hung in the air between them like a heavy fog. Danielle felt the weight of Marcus's statement pressing down on her. She had been a victim of racism, of abuse of power, but now she was learning that there was a whole system behind it. Harrison wasn't just an isolated incident. He was part of a much larger operation, and now, for reasons she didn't fully understand, she was involved. She tried to process what Marcus had just told her. This wasn't just about one cop or one bad day. It was about a network of corruption that reached deep into the city's infrastructure. As she thought about it, something clicked inside her. You're telling me this goes all the way to the top? Marcus nodded solemnly. It's bigger than you think. The police, the politicians, even some business owners, they're all tangled in this web. Danielle could feel her heart race at the thought. She had always known the world was unfair, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. She had thought that standing up to one cop was the answer, but now she realized the fight was going to be much larger than that. What can we do? She asked, her voice steady but filled with determination. Marcus took a deep breath. We take them down. But we can't do it alone. We need evidence. We need to show the world what's really going on here. Danielle felt a surge of power. Finally, the tables were turning. The moment of injustice at the bus stop was only the spark. Now she could be part of something much bigger. She wasn't just fighting for herself or her mother anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been oppressed or silenced. But there was still the question of what to do next. She could see the fire in Marcus's eyes, but it was clear that even he didn't have all the answers. He was part of the military, and his training had always focused on action, on knowing exactly what to do when it was time to strike. But this wasn't a war zone. This was a city, and the enemy wasn't just foreign soldiers. It was a corrupt system that had been built right under their noses. As they walked side by side, making their way to a nearby park to discuss their next move, Marcus continued to speak. There's a lot more at stake here than just exposing a few bad cops. The people behind this, Harrison included, they're dangerous, and they have power. Danielle looked at him, seeing the reality of what she was about to get involved in. So we need more than just evidence. We need allies. Marcus gave a small nod. Exactly. You won't be able to fight this on your own. We need people from all sides. Anyone who's been wronged. Anyone who has access to the right kind of information. The more we gather, the stronger we'll be. The idea of gathering allies struck a chord with Danielle. She had always been independent, but this wasn't a battle she could face alone. She thought about her own circle of friends, her community. They had all felt the sting of racial injustice, but had they ever realized how deep the rot went? Marcus continued, I have contacts, but we'll need to be careful. Anyone we trust might be under surveillance already. There are people in high places who would do anything to keep this under wraps. And the cops? Danielle asked, her mind racing. We can't just confront them head on. They'll kill us before we even get the chance. Marcus's eyes flashed with a mix of caution and certainty. That's why we need to be smart. We gather the right people, we build the evidence, and then we strike at the right moment. We expose them publicly, but we do it in a way that they can't deny. It was clear that Tasha wasn't just some random military agent. She had been trained for this. Everything about her screamed strategic thinking. She wasn't here to play games. She wasn't going to stop until the whole system was exposed for the corrupt operation it was. Danielle felt her resolve strengthen. She wasn't about to be a passive victim anymore. This wasn't just a matter of justice for her mother. It was about all of them. Marcus gave her a serious look. You've got the strength for this, Danielle. But it won't be easy. There will be times when you'll feel like giving up, when it feels like no one's on your side. But remember, this is bigger than you. It's bigger than all of us. For a moment, Danielle simply nodded, but deep down she knew that Marcus was right. She had always fought for what was right, but now it felt different. The stakes had grown higher. Later that evening, as Danielle sat at home, she couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation. The news of what had happened at the bus stop had already spread through the neighborhood, but now she needed to gather information. She couldn't wait for the authorities to act. They had failed her mother once, and they would fail her again. She grabbed her phone and called a few people, friends, acquaintances, anyone who might know someone who could help. She didn't know if they could trust her, but at least she had to try. "We have to make noise," she said to herself, as she typed out a message to a journalist she knew from a local news outlet. "We have to make sure they know what happened today. Make sure they know that this is only the beginning." Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a text from Marcus. "We're meeting tomorrow. Be ready. We take the fight to them." Danielle smiled faintly. She wasn't afraid anymore. This fight wasn't just about the past. It was about a future where people like her wouldn't have to fight so hard to be treated like human beings. The next morning came quickly, the events of the previous day still fresh in Danielle's mind. She had spent the entire night planning and thinking of every possible outcome. She had no illusions about what they were about to do. This wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a fight for change. Danielle met Marcus in a quiet park, a place where they could talk without attracting too much attention. The air was still intense, and the sun was only just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the green grass. She could see the determination in Marcus's eyes. He had been through hell before, but this time, the stakes were personal for both of them. "You ready?" Marcus asked as he approached, his voice low and steady. Danielle nodded, more than ready. They sat on a bench together, surrounded by the calm morning quiet. It was hard to imagine that just days ago they had been strangers. Now they were partners in a fight that would challenge everything they had known. "We're going to need a plan," Marcus said, pulling out a small notebook. "I've got connections. I've been working on a few things, but we need to make sure we hit them where it hurts." Danielle looked at him, her mind racing. "We need leverage, something that forces them to expose themselves, something they can't ignore." Marcus thought for a moment before nodding. "We'll need the media, and not just anyone. We need the right people to push this story forward. We need to bring the public into this fight, and that's where we start." The plan was set. They needed to gather everything they could to expose the officers, the corruption, the lies that had been hidden for so long. It wasn't going to be easy, but Marcus was right. They couldn't do this alone. They agreed to meet with a few trusted allies over the next few days, people who could help them access the kind of information they needed. Marcus would reach out to his contacts in law enforcement and politics, while Danielle focused on the media angle. She had a few journalists she could trust, people who had reported on similar stories before and weren't afraid to go after the truth. As they were finalizing their plans, they received an unexpected visit from an old friend of Marcus's. A tall, stern-looking man named Reggie, who had served with Marcus in the military, walked into the park. Reggie had a reputation for being unyielding and methodical, someone who could get things done without drawing attention to himself. "We've got a lead," Reggie said as he sat down beside them, his voice low. "I've got a guy who's been working undercover in the department. He's got info on Harrison and Blake, everything we need to make sure they pay for what they've done." Danielle's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the piece of the puzzle they had been waiting for. "What do we have to do?" she asked, leaning forward, her hands gripping the edge of the bench. Reggie glanced at Marcus, who gave him a nod of approval. "We go in hard. We bring the truth to light. No mercy." Marcus turned to Danielle. "You ready?" Danielle didn't hesitate. "Let's do this." Over the next few days, the plan took shape. The three of them worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, reaching out to their contacts, and making sure they had everything they needed. There was no room for error. As the day of the public reveal approached, they put the final pieces in place. Marcus reached out to the journalist who had covered similar cases, ensuring that their story would be front-page news. Reggie's undercover source had given them everything they needed: secret recordings, internal memos, and other documents that exposed the corruption within the police department. But as the clock ticked down, the stakes grew higher. Harrison and Blake weren't going to take this lying down. They were already preparing to silence anyone who came too close to the truth. Finally, the day came. The story was ready to break. The news outlet where Marcus had arranged the meeting was set to release the story, complete with hard-hitting evidence. Danielle felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of everything they had fought for. They had the evidence, they had the support, they were ready to take down the system. But as they watched the broadcast go live, something unexpected happened. The news anchor on the screen went quiet for a moment, and then the breaking news flashed across the screen. Breaking news: major police corruption scandal, several high-ranking officers exposed in widespread criminal activities. The story they had worked so hard on was out there for the world to see. Their efforts had paid off. The officers, the corrupt officials, they were all being exposed for the world to see. But even as the first wave of justice came crashing down, Tasha knew this was just the beginning. They had unleashed a storm, and now the world would have to deal with the consequences of the secrets they had been hiding for so long. "This is only the start," Tasha whispered, watching the news unfold. She knew that more would come, more battles, more struggles, but they had taken the first step.